Today we're going to delve into Carl Jung, the concept of the shadow, the collective unconscious, the psyche. I wanted to make this episode because it's going to be a nice baseline foundation for some of the other things that we may be talking about on this podcast. I know on the last episode with Allison, she talked about how having your own business is the fastest form of shadow work that you can be doing. And then it made me realize that we need to do an episode on shadow work. Let's start with who Carl Jung is and give a little bit of a background. So Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. He was born in 1875. He died in 1961. He actually originally had been collaborating with Freud, but they ended up parting ways due to differences that they had. Theoretical differences. The differences really came down to that Freud was hyper focused on sex and the role of sexuality in development, whereas Jung had a little bit of a different view on this. Jung worked as a hospital psychiatrist for quite some time. He had a lot of interest more in spirituality, mythology, dreams, the unconscious mind. So he had some different ways of looking at the human condition than Freud did. Jung's work, in my opinion, does a really good job at bridging spirituality with psychology in a way that makes a lot of sense. One of his big contributions that he gave to us was the concepts around the collective unconscious. And the way that I would describe the collective unconscious, and this is my technology background speaking, but it's essentially the public cloud of data of all human experiences that we all have access to. A shared consciousness that holds universal symbols, archetypes, and these common experiences we all have as humans. This is why certain symbols can transcend cultures over the course of time, because it is still part of our collective consciousness in our ancestry and in our history. Now we're going to just go over the basics on some of the terminology and some of the concepts of Jung's work, starting with the definition of the psyche. Some people might also call this the soul. It's kind of the operating system of a human being, of the mind, of all conscious and unconscious processes. So the psyche is essentially the totality of the human mind, feelings, memories, perceptions that integrate our experiences with our inner world to our outer world. Everything from basic human instincts to the highest forms of intellectual or spiritual processes. Then there is what is known as the ego. Our ego is essentially a little bit like a user interface. It's essentially helping you make sense of your inner and outer worlds and taking in the information from the outside world and programming you essentially on how to exist and be safe within that environment. So the ego is actually a wonderful defense mechanism for us for survival. Sometimes people will say, oh, get rid of the ego, have an ego death. And really the ego does serve a purpose and it's not all bad. The ego can be beneficial, but it can also bring us trouble because the ego can't necessarily access some of those unconscious programs that are running in the background. And let's talk about that. What is running in the unconscious? If you think about it this way, you're born as a whole being and your environment is consistently telling you what is safe, what is unsafe, who you should be, who you shouldn't be, and everything gets reflected back to you. So that might be you're a child and you get startled when a dog barks and your parent goes, oh, did that scare you? These types of reflective things that happen in our environment give us the information that we need to know who we are. And especially as a child, before the age 8 is when you're really taking in the baseline programming of who you're going to be as a person. So all of these experiences will shape you. Now, in that process, there might be parts of you, and even beyond 8 years old, there might be parts of you that you deem are unsafe or are unacceptable by your tribe or the people around you to express. And that can look like, as a child, you wanted to make art, but one of your parents said, no one can actually make money. A starving artist isn't a good thing. So you put down the paintbrush. Little things like that will take little parts of us and hide it. This can be a boy is hugging his friend who is also a male, and someone says that that's gay in a derogatory way. Well, that child might then internalize that gay is very wrong, and therefore will try to do everything to not be gay. So we do this on so many different levels of humans. We all have an unconscious shadow side of us. And essentially, they're the hidden files of our true nature that get pushed into the background. And this could be good parts of us, like being creative or being outgoing. A lot of women are conditioned that being outgoing might mean being too bossy, and that might not be so good in certain societies. So there are certain traits or characteristics that gets pushed back into our unconscious mind, and then we respond to the world in a way to align with who we unconsciously believe we should be or how we should act. Think about it that way. The issue is when things go into your unconscious awareness, you're essentially fragmenting who you are, and those pieces are always going to want to come out somehow. So this can look like if someone says, I keep going through this cycle. I keep getting in relationships that don't work out. I keep blowing up and having fights with my spouse. Or I keep getting triggered by my female friends. Or I really hate it when my sister keeps asking me for money. It really triggers me. There's always going to be something that happens in your external world that are going to keep bringing these things to your doorstep, because your psyche wants to integrate itself, those conscious and unconscious parts, right? And bring those unconscious pieces to the forefront to make them conscious. And it will show up in your life in all of these ways that you feel like you're not in control of. Okay. So think about it that way. Carl Jung, his famous quote is, until you bring the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is truly what happens with our unconscious pieces of ourselves, is that it directs our behaviors in ways that we cannot see. They are blind spots to us in our life. So Carl Jung, the concept of individuation is essentially integration of all of this stuff, bringing the unconscious conscious and returning to your true self. And some spiritual people call this enlightenment, but really from a psychological point of view is that you are just bringing forward parts of yourself that you didn't allow yourself to be. And there are certain ways that you can do this. There's a lot of ways, actually. We'll get into that later. So the shadow can come forward and not only just actions and behaviors that are potentially undesired, it can also look like projection. And this is usually how the shadow wants you to see it. You can't consciously look at yourself in certain ways or accept certain parts of you, so it gets projected onto others. So this looks like judging others, getting the ick from somebody. Projection is by far the way that I can really do really quick and fast shadow work. Projection for me is how I am able to do shadow work pretty quickly, because if I catch myself judging someone or raising an eyebrow or getting the ick, it is a very clear indication that I have some shadow work to do. So I would invite you, the next time that someone triggers you, you feel annoyed, you get the ick, you get disgusted by somebody, you have a judgment, look deeper, because it always has something to do with you. And I will leave, at the end of this episode, I will leave you with an exercise to do for yourself, just to see how profound doing shadow work can be. And this is the core of what I do with my clients in my coaching practice. Another way that the shadow will show itself is in dreams. So dreams are your unconscious's way of communicating with you and connecting with you. So a lot comes up in dreams, especially if you start doing work on your unconscious shadow, doing shadow work, your dreams might uptick a little bit because your unconscious mind is going, oh yes, they're trying to talk to me. They're trying to communicate. They're trying to find out what's back here behind the veil, right? So dreams are another way that the shadow will come through. The ego will try to stop you from getting to your shadow because the ego has deemed that these parts are unsafe. That's why that piece is back there, and the ego really doesn't want to fuck with it. And like the ego doesn't want to go there. The ego is like, that's there for a reason. That's in the unconscious mind. We don't go there. The ego is also what you communicate internally in your mind to make rationalizations or excuses for your behavior too. So remember that. Then there's also the concept of the persona, okay? The persona is more like the mask we show to the world. So the ego is more internal of how we rationalize things to ourselves, but the persona is the mask that we put on that we want everybody to see. Okay, so let's make sure that we're connecting all of this, right? There's the self. That's essentially who you truly are, okay? And then there is the unconscious. These are all things that have been pushed from the conscious mind into the unconscious awareness, into the shadow. These are certain memories, beliefs, aspects of ourself that we cannot live out consciously or in our persona expression because there was some experience that we had that deemed it unsafe. Now, the unconscious works also to keep us safe. If you think about our reflexes, if an oncoming bus is driving towards you, it's the instinct to jump out of the way. And we learn all of these reflexes when we're little so that when something like that happens, we don't have to think for 5 seconds of how am I going to jump out of the way of this bus. So the unconscious is great for that. It's awesome for our automatic processes. Where it becomes problematic is when we take legitimate pieces of ourselves and put it back there and operate in a way that suppresses these attributes of ourselves. Then there is your ego, and that is your internal identity that has been shaped by your experiences and interfaces with the external world to keep you safe and to communicate information to you about who you are and who you need to be. And this is the piece that you will consciously communicate with and who you think you are. And then there is the persona, which is the mask that you wear to others on how you want others to perceive you in the world. And there's nothing wrong with having a persona. As human beings, we all have this, especially when we were younger. It was very important to have a strong persona. We learned that this is how we create our identity in the world, and there is nothing wrong with that, but just to know what it is. And then there is your conscious mind, which is all of the things that you can consciously access, right? Memories, ideas, your intellect, that is all in your conscious mind. And then there is the collective unconscious. And again, that is the cloud of experiences of human nature. Okay. Another concept of Jung's work is the concept of the anima and animus. So the anima and animus basically are saying that all men have a repressed inner woman and every woman has repressed inner man that they need to integrate. And I think for his time, this might have been pretty progressive, but in my opinion now, these concepts are a little dated. But it is the idea that everybody has masculine and feminine energy and those archetypes within their psyche. And by repressing one or the other, they're actually doing a disservice to themselves. And you do see this all the time with, let's say, men thinking that being emotional or vulnerable is a female trait so that they can't show it. Otherwise, it makes them a woman. These types of repressions have a very negative effect on the human psyche. So anima and animus, that's how you have to think about it. I like to expand that to gender nonconforming, LGBT. There have been later studies by other Jungian analysts that kind of go into the idea of expanding this topic. But just so you know, that's what it means. And then going back into archetypes, well, like, what is an archetype? Archetypes are essentially universal characters or themes that pop up over generations, time after time, in dreams. They're universal. So think about the hero, the mother, the trickster. There are all these different characters of the human experience that show up in all of our myths and parables across time. The concept is that we have access to all of these archetypal energies since we are plugged into the collective unconscious. Jung also spoke a lot about synchronicity, and what synchronicity is the concept of meaningful coincidences where two or more events occur in a way that seem related, but one is not caused by the other. Coincidences that are so timely or significant that they seem to suggest that there's some underlying pattern or power at play. So depending on your background, some people might say these are messages from God, it's signs from the universe, but it could look something like this. You're considering moving to a new city, but you're not really sure if that's the right choice for you. The next thing you know, you get a call from somebody giving you a job offer in that city. You go to the coffee shop and you overhear someone talking about a movie they saw that took place in that city and was one of the best movies they ever saw. You're walking down the streets and somebody drops a book right in front of you and it's a guidebook for that city. They are coincidences that are so timely and just significant that you can't ignore the coincidence. So this is what Jung calls synchronicity. And what's interesting is that the more you uncover the self and the more you integrate shadow and do shadow work, the more these magical coincidences just seem to happen in your life. I like to say is that you're kind of becoming one with the simulation. You clear all the garbage out of the cache, and all of a sudden you are running through the program a lot more smoothly and things are just happening in your favor because now you're on the right track. Doing shadow work isn't necessarily about getting rid of anything. It's about integrating your beliefs around those things that have been pushed into your unconscious mind. Facing those beliefs in order to be a fuller version of yourself. It's essentially reprogramming your processes in a way that align to who you are and who you are meant to be. And this is what Jung called individuation, which is essentially integration of all of the parts and pieces of you leading to a whole self. If you think about it in another way, as you get programmed in this world, you're fracturing off pieces of yourself that don't fit in the model that's being given to you. And that fracturing leads to not having full access to who you truly are and to your soul. So shadow work, in essence, is bringing those pieces back to you for personal wholeness. So how can you get started on shadow work? There's a few ways. Anything you can do to get in touch with your unconscious is great work to do for the shadow. So that could be making art, writing poetry. It could be doing different types of somatic therapy to get in touch with your body, because sometimes things go not only into the unconscious mind, but into the unconscious of the body. Working through the body, you can sometimes unlock things in the unconscious mind as well. My favorite, it's more of an intellectual practice, but it is essentially doing thought work and reflective work based on the things that bother, upset, or trigger you in your everyday life. I do suggest working with a coach, a Jungian coach, or a coach that is well versed in shadow work. It can be very helpful because when you're dealing with the unconscious mind, there may be lots of blocks. And also, there is a piece to having somebody there and witnessing your process that helps accelerate it. Also, if you have childhood trauma or anything that's particularly hard, that I would call a capital T trauma in your past, the unconscious shadow is sometimes even more walled off and difficult to access. So again, having somebody by your side doing this work can be really beneficial. But I'll leave you with an exercise on getting to the root of one of your shadows. So first, I want you to think about somebody who has recently triggered you. Think about the situation. What bothered you about it? What's the feeling of this trigger? Where do you feel it in your body? Now, that person that triggered you, I want you to pick 3 words or phrases to describe that person. And don't be PC about it. Get real. Pick the negative qualities about that person. If you have a piece of paper, it'd be helpful to write this down. And now I want you to ask yourself, why is it so bad to be those qualities you just listed? Why is it so bad to be that? And what would happen if they never stopped being that way? What would be the tragedy there? What would life end up like for them? Now, how do you avoid being like that person? What are things that you do to make sure that you're not like them? Now, those qualities that you perceived being negative about the person that's triggering you, what would be possible for you if you did not fear being those things? What would be possible for you if you did not fear being those qualities of that person who triggered you? The concept of this is that these qualities that are triggering you in this other person that you do not want to be like is essentially a piece of you that you might be pushing away, or perhaps you're jealous of, that you perhaps wish you could be that way in certain aspects of your life. Now, I want you to sit with this feeling of this trigger and don't try to fix it. Just watch it. Watch the feeling arise and notice how your mind tries to get rid of it. When your mind suppresses this feeling, you're actually giving it more power. By allowing it to be there, it no longer controls you. And you could continue to do this practice of observing the feelings that come up with these triggers and not trying to fix, but just allowing them to be there. And sometimes that's all we need to do when it comes to integration. It's allowing these uncomfortable feelings to come up and transmute in your body and in your emotional centers, okay? And for some people, that exercise can be emotional. This is one way, the practice I just ran you through, to do shadow work. There's many other ways to do it, but it is some of the best work you can do on yourself and for yourself, because becoming more of who you truly are and who your soul wants to be isn't just better for your life, it's better for everybody else's life around you. It's better for your family, it's better for your friends, it's better for the people you work with, it's better for your community. So healing work isn't only for you, it's for the collective of humanity. If you are on this journey on being the best version of yourself, I commend you. I give you lots of props because it is hard to be brave and go into the shadows and reclaim these pieces of yourself that have been pushed away for so long. It's uncomfortable, can be painful, but I promise you the light at the end of the tunnel is so worth it. And I'm, of course, happy to help you in your journey. And if you're interested in just wanting to know more about how to do this work, or you're interested in working with me, I do offer first sessions, no cost, that can be booked on my website, and I will also put it in the show notes. Appreciate you being here. Until next time.